identities began to rise up and challenge the hegemony, the dominance of a society that would seek to contain it. Race metastasizes. Race breaks out. Race is unhinged. It can never be carefully contained. Even in the conceptual apparatus of race, we began to deal with difference, but even that is a rather fragile freighter for the deep and abiding meanings that race sends forth into the world. So when we talk about America and we talk about rethinking race, we're rethinking America because America is different because of the presence of difference. And America is different because of the presence of different kinds of folk who come here. Different tribes and traditions and tongues, different understandings and self-explanations, different ways of competing and computing the world. And so when I think about what we do to rethink race, a lot of us would rather run from race. Because we've been running from the fact that race has been so central. Those historians who denied that the Civil War was central to redefining America in regard to race, that race had no big role, that the slaves played no big role, and yet right there in front of their faces was the undeniable fact, the incontrovertible evidence that racial difference was at the heart of the schism, the internal division, the Civil War in American life. It was not simply a civil war between geographies. It was a civil war in the soul of America. There was literally schizophrenia in the collective psyche of the American nation. And often the Rorschach test, the ink blot that determined their sanity, was on the face or the back of a black slave. Our sanity itself was being questioned every day. Our legitimacy was being questioned every day, and yet we were the instrument for the self-realization of a people who doubted our worth and significance. How ironic and even paradoxical that as American ingenuity was being put forth, it rested upon the labor of African people, and not simply our brawn, but our brain as well. The high intelligence of Jan Matzeliger and the shoelasting machine, the brilliance of the stoplights that was rested upon black inventiveness. Yes, even with Thomas Alva Edison, other black inventors working day and night to make sure that America would become the land of invention. Benjamin Banneker helping to lay out plans for Washington, D.C. after Paris was its paradigm and role model. There is so much of black ingenuity, black intellectual power in Frederick Douglass, black rhetorical genius in Douglass, and then Booker T. Black rhetorical and intellectual genius joined to the greatest scholarly pursuits in W.E.B. Du Bois. The powerful ambition of blackness, when unleashed on the American soil, recreated the possibility of what America could ever be. And then, when we think about the fact that race is so central, we both acknowledge race's existence and try to run from it at the same time. A lot of us run from race. We live, as has been stated, in the United States of amnesia. The theme song is provided by Barbara Streisand. What's too painful to remember, we simply choose to forget. A lot of us want to forget because it's been ugly and funky back there. We don't want to tell the truth about race because it makes us uncomfortable. It calls to memory that people did bad stuff. And listen, nobody just wants to sit around and point fingers. Black folk have never been about trying to extract revenge. I mean, I wonder sometimes if American brothers and sisters, when looking at the fractious interventions of terror in this modern American soil, ever stop to think, black folk never dropped no bombs, and never rolled up in a pizza joint trying to tear things up, and never went to a lunch counter and tried to strap on a suicide mechanism to tear Woolworth down. 50 years ago, 4 black boys non-violently, while cigarette butts were being put out on their neck. While they stood, there were coffee being thrown in their face, and the repudiation and rejection of their humanity. They did nothing except sing "We Shall Overcome" and showed up every day and gave love in the name of the God they loved. And yet we'd rather run from race because we want to run from the reality that it has shaped so much of who we are as America. America is both obsessed and fatigued with race, and that paradox defines our resistance and our recalcitrance and our refusal to even come to grips with the fundamental issues of race. We'd rather run from race. We'd rather not talk about it. We have collective amnesia. We don't even want to speak on it. Stuff that happened that we pretend we didn't even know happened, and then sometimes we ain't got to pretend. We just don't want to know, so we don't study, so we don't find out. And this is not just in terms of dominant culture. Some people of color don't want to know. It's too painful. They don't even want to remember. For their own sanity and survival's sake, they just try to forget. They don't even want to recall. They don't want their blood pressure to boil. They don't want their sanity to be eroded. They don't want their tongues to turn into razors, so they just forget about it. Suppress it, forget it, release it. Some of them hold it dear and near, clutching it to themselves as a newly gained purse. Some of them dig deep into the sorrows and griefs that have been, if you will, planted deep into their psyches, and they every now and again dig it up and smell its odor and then refuse to inhale it. Some of them look at it and just from a distance across the room feel its powerful terror and refuse to engage it, yet we cannot run ultimately from race. And so some of us not only run from it, react to it. We constantly just, it happens, we react. Skip Gates, Sergeant Crowley, President Obama beer summit. Right? Taylor Swift, Kanye West. Taylor Swift, Entertainer of the Year, Album of the Year. When will it stop? We don't really, so we react to it. We mad at Kanye for snatching the Globe, the trophy away from the Moon Man, I guess it is, MTV, away from Taylor Swift. Tall, talented, beautiful, intelligent, of course, gifted. But then in comparison to the worldly force of nature, that feral, Brobdingnagian, vehemently talented Beyonce. What you gonna do with that? It just comes at you from every angle. You can't even deconstruct it. Is she fine? Is she fit? Is she formidable? Is she brilliant? Is she talented? Can she sing? Is she fine? You just can't make up your mind. So we react. The president says something about Sergeant Crowley, and we react. He says they were acting stupidly in the Cambridge, but he ain't called them stupid. He said acting stupidly. He had a brother flashback. You got to forget that, brother. You know, Obama's usually cool with it. Stop. Yes, we can. He walking out Air Force One. Ask him questions. Well, yes. But that day, he caught a brother flashback. Just for a nanosecond, it split his consciousness. It implanted in his subconscious a feral resistance to the vicious and invidious assault upon vulnerable black masculinity by some police forces, and he caught her acting stupidly. Police force got upset, saying, why you jamming up the police force? It took the most powerful man in the world and arguably the most famous black scholar in America to go up against the word of an honorable and yet anonymous white policeman, and they lost. Those are the conversations we don't want to have. Usually when we say, let's deal with race, it is when black folk must face up to the fact that they have out-of-wedlock births that are escalating. It's usually the fact that black folks must finally admit that they've had 30 years of affirmative action and they still ain't no better. They must admit that their intelligence is not as high as white brothers and sisters when tested. That's usually what people mean when they say, let's talk honestly about race, not the fact that when Kanye snatched that trophy from Taylor Swift, we ain't said he had no highfalutin intentionality.